Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Body Snatchers. The invasion continues. So, this is a Body Snatchers movie, and I don't know, I kind of really just had to review some of these movies, just because sometimes there's at some points in time when you're describing a movie, it kind of comes out a certain way that it ends up making you realize, oh yeah, gee golly, maybe I shouldn't have said this word or that word there, so on and so forth. Within this movie, really, I actually like the whole Invasion of the Body Snatchers series. I've seen every single version of that movie, and to where eventually I'm probably going to be re-reviewing every single version of it, even the black and white version, because I actually think that all of these versions are actually really interesting, and even the black and white version, there is kind of this interesting build up that we get here. So at the end of the day, people could be like, well, if I'm looking to go in and watch this movie, there isn't a free avenue for me to do so. Well, I had been doing this app called Movie Pro for I don't know how long now, and reasonably everything is right there to watch for free. You could basically watch this version of Body Snatchers in or on Movie Pro for absolutely free, or you can even watch the other Donald Sutherland or Dollar, yeah. Um, you can watch that other alternate version with Jeff Goldblum in it. There we go. You can watch that for free on Movie Pro as well, because eventually I hope to at some point cover that again, because I actually really enjoyed that. And plus, I know before, I used to do movies in bulk where I would review 3 to 4 movies all at one in one video. But now I'm trying to get to the point of just going how do I just review one movie? How about I just if I'll do one show, but I'll watch a couple episodes and then I'll review it. That's what I'll do. So with that said, Body Snatchers. How did I feel about this film? Well, it's kind of obvious that this movie, to me, kind of breaks more down as a made for TV kind of movie, even though there is, at points in time, there is quite a bit of scenes where we just have women just walking around with nothing on. That happens quite a bit within this movie, to where we either have the mother, who is Meg Tilly, but her character's name is Carol Malone. She is just kind of walking around in all her glory, and we end up having the main character who is Marty Malone, who is also doing the same thing, because we really have it to where you can really tell a difference between the normal human person that would be much more conservative and the pod person that ends up going and spaghettiing uh, a person's face, because it really just looks like somebody's just attaching pasta all over this person's face, which I found was interesting. So, if anything, the version of this movie compared to others, I like how we have it to where the normal human beings are just going bat crap crazy within this movie. We have it to where there's several people that don't know who to trust. We have it to where there's obviously people realizing that they cannot sleep. It's like Freddy Krueger all over again, to where they've haven't slept for days because they don't know who to trust, and so on and so forth. And so I thought that this movie was just really interesting, where we get this really good build up of eventually the normal human being just breaking down, right when they are to pretty much be taken for most of the point. Uh, at first we can really tell the difference between the alien versions and the human versions. But then eventually it gets to the point to where you're kind of unsure, to where the point is that you have to turn a gun on that friend of yours or that family member of yours, and then find out that, oh yeah, I guess they are the alien being, the alien creature, the pod person. So that's what I kind of enjoyed about this, is like you have it to where it seems that uh it seems that, like, especially when you have it to where, as like towards the tail end of the remake, of course, with Jeff Goldblum, you end up having it to where you can't trust that the main character of that movie is going to be like, is he just playing, or is it real, or so on and so forth. And then in this movie you have it to where the people that are surrounding said main person, who I believe is Marty, even though you could say it's like, oh no, well, it's her family, or if anything, it's her and this boyfriend that could be the main focus, and so on and so forth. But going into these movies, I enjoy kind of the mystery of this film, because yeah, a lot of people would just say, "Dude, this is the most simplest movie whatsoever." Like, we have it to where, like, you have the real person, and then you cut to a scene, and then it's like that same person being taken out of a pod or whichever, or it's just like cut perfectly to where you can have like one person be like the villainous person and the other person be the whichever. Anyways, um, I like how these movies were cut because it's really interesting. You have it to where, especially like cut out of sequence, where you have especially like the bathtub scene that ends up being put in this movie, where you have like the girl that is basically face to face with her own clone, supposedly. Like, I would have thought, like, you could have easily had these scenes if you would have had like a twin of whoever. Like, I think that would actually been a smart decision, because that would have worked out a lot better than what like having to like cut so much. Like, I think that they should have just hired identical twins for this whole entire movie, and man, would that would have been interesting for this film. But anyways, yeah. So I think that's all that I wanted to say about this movie. We really have it to where uh, people aren't really understanding what's going on until eventually we get to that build up of eventually somebody finally figuring it out, and then we are told that people like should not or cannot sleep because because the invader, or in this case the pod person, will pasta them and get into their face and then suck the life out of them, and then eventually you'll see what the end result of that is. Um, yeah, so I enjoy this movie, but it also kind of felt like on the made for TV movie kind of spectrum. But still a good, fun movie, because like uh, it's a movie that like keeps you on the edge of your seat, to just be like, okay, like, are they gonna get out of this? Are they gonna make it? Like, what's all gonna happen? Like, is it all just gonna end badly for them? Because like they kind of leave it in the fact of it, quite possibly there isn't exactly a pure cut ending with this version, to whereas other versions you'd see like maybe all is lost. So with that said, let's get into spoilers, because there's only so much that I could say about this movie. um, it also is quite interesting to see some characters where you get to see them be this like horrible person, and then you get to see them bizarrely change, and that sets off a red flag uh, for characters. It's like, say for example, like you have it to where like disturbing behavior, that movie, where we have it to where uh, the one kid had an entire photo of this entire football team that they were all like bikers and druggies and all these kinds of stuff. But then eventually, like all of these kids, I guess, just woke up one day and decided, no, like, you know what, I should change my whole life around and now be a football jock, and like I should really be helping out the community. And this kid was just like, well, this doesn't quite make sense. It's like these people have gone and done a whole 180 and been a completely different person than who they were, and to the point to where all of a sudden like I'm the outcast from knowing them, and it's so weird. So with that said, I think it's about time to go into spoiler territory if I haven't already. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So in the very beginning of this film, we have a family, the Malones, all coming and driving into this new town because we have Steve Malone, who is a scientist who is being involved in this experiment within this town. And so the most interesting part is in the very beginning. We end up having Marty kind of giving us like a heads up of who these people are, what's going on. And so Marty ends up just going to a bathroom nearby a gas station, and she ends up being grabbed by some military officer and shoved into a bathroom. And she ends up having this guy tell her, it's like, well, hey, don't fall asleep and like don't trust anybody. And so Marty runs out of the bathroom going like, oh my god, like this guy's crazy. And so we end up having we end up having the Malones, and we end up having the like I guess the gas station attendant with a shotgun going into the bathroom to realize that the soldier had gone. Like the only thing that I thought was just jarring in this entire movie, honestly, was like this Terry Kinney. Uh, like the only thing that I thought was just out of place with this movie was honestly the father. Like it, like that guy like took forever to go where he did in this movie, but like to me, like meaning to eventually like he wasn't like the alien all along. No. But if anything, like honestly, some of his performance in this movie kind of felt very alien. It felt very weird. Uh, like when watching this movie, I was like yeah, like it seems like the father, like every little bit of like performance that he was trying to do just seems very wooden, bizarrely. It's like I don't know, like he it's like he had to deliver these lines, but a lot of the time it was just like it didn't always feel right to me, but it is what it is. So going on in this movie, we have Marty who goes on uh, with her family to go into this home, and immediately they are to go on to this home that is by this military base where they have to kind of uh, have papers and stuff like that to like even get into this area, because we have it to where Steve has to uh, tell the soldiers why exactly he's there. He's there from some experiments, and so they let him in. So while we have the Malones seemingly moving in fairly quickly, we also have it to where the soldiers end up going and dropping a bunch of boxes to the Malone house, and say that they're like, oh, well, it's like science stuff, it's experiments, we're just dropping stuff off. To where eventually we have these soldiers drop things off like in parts of the house where it's not anywhere would make sense. And so we have Marty who goes and asks the soldiers like, "Excuse me, should you actually be in that room?" And the soldiers are like, "Yes, we're dropping things off. We're dropping the experiments off." And Marty's like, "Okay, that's weird. Okie dokie." So we have it to where we have I think the youngest kid, Andy, going off to school. And so we have it to where I guess the teacher tells the children, hey, go and draw a picture. Draw whatever you want. Draw whatever you feel like. And so we have the kids, like 9 out of the 10 of them or whatever, all of them draw the exact same picture. But then Andy ends up drawing something that has a lot more color in it and has a lot more of just a different design and so on and so forth. And we end up having the teacher is like, like, so you haven't been turned yet now, have you? So we have it to where Andy goes to his parents and he's immediately like, you know what? Like, I hate this school. Like, I do not want to go to school. And so we have it to where, like, the parents are like, well, why, Andy? Like, why do you not want to go to school? It's like, and he's like, well, like, I painted a different picture than everyone else. And I was, like, just an outcast. And we have it to where Andy is starting to see things even before Marty is having the ability to, like, she sees things a little bit too late. So we have it to where Andy ends up having nightmares and ends up having his parents coddle him and protect him and whatever. And so while we have it to where both Carol and Steve are just kind of fooling around, but then Andy ends up going in the middle of the night to his parents' bed to try to get comfort. And so we eventually find that, of course, with being in this house, we eventually find that uh, that of course the parents end up falling asleep. So the first one to get body swapped is actually Carol. And so we end up having it to where Carol ends up uh, seemingly like her body double is in the bathroom and uh, her other her other original self is just kind of like in pieces in this bed. And we have it to where Andy ends up going to his mother's room to see this former body of Carol, and he's like, "Oh my god!" And so we end up having Carol rushing in with no clothes on to just say, "Oh no, hey Andy, like you like that's not what you saw. That's not what." And so we have it to where Andy tells his father that his mother is dead, and Carol, who is here, like is some kind of imposter or alien or something. And so we end up having it to where like Steve uh and Marty are just kind of chalking this up of just like, well, he's a young kid, he's making up stories, none of this makes sense, ba 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 ba. And so we have it to where Carol is just kind of scolding this child and like consistently ridiculing him when, of course, uh, the mom, of course, when the father and the daughter aren't around because she's like, well, yeah, you caught me, kind of thing. So we eventually have it to where Andy is to go and uh, is to walk from when he was still in school. He ended up walking away from school, and so we end up having two military official guys uh, picking Andy up. One of them, of course, is Tim Young, and so we have Tim Young and his other associate picking up this kid to drive him home, and so we end up having Tim Young and Marty Malone talking to one another, and Tim Young kind of mentions a bar at some location to just like, well, hey, maybe we'll get together sometime, and maybe we'll talk more. Uh, and eventually, we have it to where it seems that Marty is seemingly so easy to make friends, and so we have it to where Marty ends up making best friends with a girl named Jen Platt. We end up finding out uh, that Jen Platt is seemingly kind of like a very like rebel-ish like girl. Like I would say like she's very much like a Billy Idol or something like that. Like very like rebel yell. Anyways, so we have Jen who does things that she's not supposed to with the age of which she is. We have it to where uh, Jen is supposedly like 18 years old, I think, and she's already drinking because it seems like her mother is a drunk to the point to where it seems she uh, like almost lights the house on fire because she just lets her cigarette just kind of be in her hand as she falls asleep because she ends up getting blackout drunk oftentimes. So we end up having it to where uh, Jen and Marty are uh, to eventually just like have a night out together, and eventually Jen ends up taking Marty home. So the next day, we end up finding out that Jen realizes that her mother is all of a sudden like bizarrely drinking water, and like she's a completely different person than she was before. That Jen's mother all of a sudden is going out to play bridge with some friends, and we end up having it to where Jen says like she doesn't even know how to play bridge. She's never played that before. So we are to naturally assume that eventually, sometime soon, that Jen is probably going to become a pod person because that's what always happens. So we eventually have Jen and Marty uh, going out to this bar, which of course uh, makes Marty this rebellious girl. So we have Jen and Marty going to this bar to meet up with, you guessed it, Tim Young and his army friend, and so we end up having them talking it out, and like it seems like they are going to have a real legitimate relationship going on here. And so Marty ends up freaking out because she ends up noticing a soldier that had been that exact same guy that had been that paranoid soldier that she had met in that bathroom previously earlier on in her days of being here in this town. And so we have it to where Marty mentions to Tim, "Hey, like that is that crazy paranoid soldier that I met in the bathroom from which I first arrived here, and we have it to where eventually even both Tim and Marty confront this soldier about it, and we end up having this soldier who, of course, is now a pod person who is like, no, like I don't even know what you're talking about. You need to like you need to reassess this girl because like I think there's something wrong with her. So we end up having the soldier walking off, and Mari's like, I know what I saw. Like I'm not crazy, kind of thing. We always have that moment. So uh, we end up having Marty coming home too late, and of course Steve and Carol have been waiting for her, and so Steve kind of gives her like he cracks down on her, try to be her father, is like because we end up having it to where Steve sees Marty coming home, smells the beer on her, and is like, you know, she's only 18, right? We have it to where Steve personally goes to Steve and kind of like puts his boots to him to just be like, hey, like, you know, she's only 18, right? And like, she shouldn't be drinking and all this kind of like the morality dad, like trying to be like the stickler to the, of course, boyfriend and so on and so forth, like the classic roles that have to be done in this movie. So we end up having Marty, who is just uh, like tired of this home, and I'm not quite sure why, because there isn't enough real true backstory for Marty to understand why like she is just so done with his family. There isn't enough here, but we end up having Marty who talks to Steve, and she's basically like, you know what, like I am just like I just cannot wait till I become 18 because I am going to be out of here. And we have it to where Steve is like, well, why do you have to wait till you're 18? Like, you can leave anytime you want. So, that is eventually when we find Andy going and questioning his mother's aliveness or his mother's alienness, and so on and so forth. So, we push on. So, I feel like I'm gonna maybe quite possibly try and like skip something here, but let's get into this. So Steve is to go and experiment and do some water experiments in this pond or sorts, doing some test samples and so on and so forth. And so we have Forrest Whitaker who is to play Major Collins. It seems that he is some uh, medical officer of the military. And so Collins ends up going to Steve and mentioning, like, hey, like, just kind of curious, like, would there ever be some kind of drug or some kind of something going around that could make guys very much paranoid? Like, as if they don't trust, like, their friends, their family, the people that they've known for years. Like, what would do that to some kind of person? Like, what would make them be so severely afraid of sleep? And we have to where Steve is like, well, I don't know. Like, I guess I would have to crack open the books and like try to figure out like what would cause all that. Uh, because he's like, yeah, I just don't have the answers for you. And Major Collins is just like, well, okay then, well, okay. So we have it to where Major Collins is like, it seems like he's kind of like rational right now, but eventually when we see him later on in the movie, he's a very irrational person. And we have him to where he's like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, because he hasn't probably slept in like 7 days. So that to me was just kind of like we're building here, and I thought it was just such a fascination of how we were like building this story to just be like to just kind of like not exactly scare anybody, but to just kind of like give you that interesting build, that the thing that I can enjoy. So we end up having uh let's get to the big old build up and payoff and whatever and what have you. So uh, we have we have Carol who is talking to her kids, and we have it to where Carol is mentioning to Marty, it's like, well, hey, like, I've prepped up a bath for you, so hey, how about you go in there before it gets cold? So we have it to where Marty goes into the bathroom, puts in her headphones, and bizarrely just starts to just doze off while she's in the tub. And so while she is to doze off, we end up finding out that the pod esh like thing is uh, is going on into dipping its pasta tentacle whatever things all onto Marty, to the point of Marty waking up while this is happening and like starting to like slowly but surely like take off uh these pieces of sorts, these alien strings of sorts that have been trying to suck the life out of her, to where we just see right off of the ceiling a seemingly person drop from the ceiling onto Marty that actually is Marty's clone herself. And like we have it to where it's like it's 80% Marty, 20% alien, and to where Marty's clone kind of mutters something, but then eventually like she's not fully fledgedly like a done clone, so she ends up just dying off into the tub. And so we end up having Marty scrambling out of the tub to go and run to her father, where we end up finding out that Steve had fallen asleep onto his bed as well, and we have underneath Steve's bed his clone growing underneath the bed, but his clone is maybe 10% done, to where we just kind of see like Steve's uh skin clone, where it's just kind of like there's no real organs, there's not really like much of like a skeleton either or anything like that. We just kind of see like a skin formation of Steve that eventually like is coming from off from under the bed to stop Marty from getting to Steve to wake him up, kind of thing. But so we end up having Steve, who ends up waking up mid uh, cloning process, and he ends up going like, "Oh my God, what is that?" And he ends up like attacking his own uh, forming cloned self, and it's crazy. So we end up having Steve grabbing Marty, and they are like running off out of their house because they're like, "What is going on?" And so we end up having Steve like confessing to Carol about what is going on, and she's like, and he's like, "We have to go, we have to run, we have to like we have to get out of here, like we have to find someplace safe." And Carol's like someplace safe? Like, wait a minute. Where do you think you're gonna go? Where do you think you're gonna run? We're everywhere. We're coming for you. And then that's like when the confirmation is over, and then you're just like, yep, like Carol is one of them. And so we have it to where Steve and Marty, and they grab Andy, and then they just book out of the house. And so we end up having Carol, who is following them out of the house, and just does the pointing, and it's like, and just like does the whole, like, of course, the obvious thing that all of these aliens do to signal to all the other aliens that, hey, like, this is a human, go and get him. And so we end up having it to where there are some human survivors that end up becoming to be left. And so we end up having some guys, like some like uh, farmer barn, whatever the heck, like guys with shotguns and whatever, that end up trying to like defend this family to where they are to drive off. So we end up having it uh, to where eventually Steve tries to make his way back to the base to kind of find anybody who is justifiably like left this whole situation, and we end up having Marty and Andy, who are just kind of in this one backtrap somewhere, singing a song about worms and stuff like that, which I guess technically, like, that's the most bizarrish song, but I guess that also just makes sense where it's like, I guess that these pod people were technically worms that were like sucking the life out of these characters. But anyways, so, which I think that that song was a little bit like weird or haunting to like do in this movie. But anyways, so we have it to where Steve ends up going uh, to his office and to also just try to find out if there's any real human really and truly left. And so we have it to where Steve ends up hearing Major Collins, who is trying to call anybody that will connect him to uh, like a real person. And so we have it to where when Major Collins is calling this thing to connect him elsewhere, we have it to where this connecting person says, "Well, yes, Major Collins, like we will put you on hold, like we'll get back to you shortly." And we have to where Major Collins is like, "Wait a minute, like how is it that you know my name? Like you should not be knowing my name." And so paranoia just sets in, and so we just have Major Collins just tossing back these pills like it's nothing, just like as if it's like candy, because I'm sure it actually is, because this guy is desperately trying to stay awake for as long as humanly possible. So we have it to where Steve like kind of like rushes to Major Collins, and he's like, "Well, hey," because Major Collins ends up like tossing a gun into Steve's face, and it's like, "Hey, like if you're one of them, like you're not coming for me, you're not gonna get me. I've outsmarted you," kind of thing. Like I've stayed awake for I don't know how long. Like I'm like you can't get me now. And so Steve is like, whoa, like, dude, I'm not one of them. I'm like, I'm just like, hey, like, if it's possible, like, maybe you can help me. Maybe you can figure out how to, like, maybe we can figure out how to, like, get out of here and so on and so forth. And so we end up having eventually where there seems to be uh, a military response to these pod people eventually coming into Major Collins's room, to where eventually Major Collins tells Steve, it's like, dude, you gotta run. Like, they're coming for you. They're coming for us. They're coming for the humans. And so we have it to where Steve ducks down in the back of one of these rooms. And so we end up having this. We end up having General Platt and all these other military-esh like people surrounding Major Collins and like basically telling them, one, that they're aliens, and that of course that Major Collins is outnumbered. There are very few uh, people here that aren't aliens at this point. And so we have it to where Major Collins is like, well, hey, you guys aren't going to take me. Like, you guys aren't going to uh, turn me into your mindless soldier. And so we end up having Major Collins firing a gun onto himself. And so we end up having supposedly just this military force walking off to find the next person. So we we have Steve who makes his way back to Marty and to Andy saying like, dude, we got to get out of here. Like, there is no real true humans left, so we just got to try and just make a run for it. So we have Marty, Andy, and Steve all getting into this car and driving off. And so we have it to where Andy just decides is like, we got to drive as far as we can and don't try to show emotions, like try to fool them. Uh, and so we end up having it to where we have this bizarre moment where Marty all of a sudden decides that Steve isn't her father. There's something different about him. And so we have Marty, who is to run out of this military vehicle and just like to the point of, so we have Tim Young, who is to hear a bunch of gunfire and all kinds of like fighting and arguing and stuff happening outside of his barracks. And so we have Tim Young waking up to have his partner come to him and tell him, it's like, well, hey man, like, go back to sleep. It's like, if anything, what all you're hearing is just a drill, like, it's perfectly fine. Just head back to sleep. And we have it to where Tim Young is like, dude, this doesn't sound like a normal drill to me. Like, this, like, it sounds like there's a war going on. And the soldiers are like, no, man, everything's fine. Go back to sleep. And so we end up having to where Tim is like, dude, I'm not going to go back to sleep. And so we end up having them going and, like, prepping a needle to get Tim to go to sleep. And so we end up having Tim like fight his friends basically and then run off to eventually be driving around to eventually find Marty running off from her father. And so Tim ends up finding Marty, and Tim ends up like throwing a gun onto this situation because he's just kind of unaware of what is really going on. And so we have it to where Marty grabs the gun from Tim and pulls the trigger on her father. And all of a sudden you just see this gunshot, and we're like, oh my god. What if he was actually just normal all along and he just lost his mind? But no, Marty was just so sure. And I was like, okay, how is it that she is so sure? And so we end up having Steve, who ends up falling over, but then eventually we end up seeing that his whole entire body just caves into the ground. And then all these like greenish juices end up falling out of his body to where like, oh, so he was an alien the whole time. Okay, cool. Like, I like that. Like, I like the cleverness of this story. and that got me really just like I was like, yeah, like the interesting kind of like you were thinking that that guy was like you were thinking that that guy was like reasonable or rational about all of this and so on and so forth. But so we have it to where Tim decides it's like, well, hey, like I got to do the one thing that like I know I need to do, and that's like I need to get a bird. Like I need to get a helicopter, and then we need to get out of here. So we have it to where Tim, Marty, and Andy are making their way to find, of course, a bird. And so we have it to where Marty tells Tim, it's like, well, hey, like, we gotta look emotionless. We gotta, like, be able to make it seem like we are one of them. So that way we can blend in. And so we end up having it to where while Tim is going and getting this bird and pretending that he is one of them, that he had joined their family and so on and so forth, uh, talking to his partner, where his partner kind of mentions some evil crap to see if Tim will punch him or whatever, and Tim is just emotionless. And so like his partner ends up saying like, okay, give him the bird, I think he's fine, I think he's one of us. So we have Tim going on into this helicopter, and while that is going on we end up having Marty and Andy getting scooped up by of course the pod people, and they end up getting arrested to be shipped off to this hospital where, of course, they are going to be turned into pod people. So we have Tim who ends up realizing that Marty and Andy had gotten arrested, and so he ends up via helicopter following them to where they are to have been dropped off. So we have it to where, and I feel like I'm like skipping something here, uh, but there's a lot going on within this movie. So we have it to where Tim ends up going through the hospital uh, stretch of things, and we end up finding one uh, military guy that wakes up and he's like, well, what the heck is going on? And then he ends up like trying to grab a gun and like shoot people, and like he ends up trying to like shoot his way out, but then he ends up getting like tackled to the ground and outnumbered. And while Tim is just trying to like, dude, I'm just gonna just keep on walking, like try not to help this guy out, even though I want to. So we have Tim going and finding Marty, and it seems that her body is going through the transformation of being a pod person, so much so that we have the Marty clone that ends up waking up and is starting to talk to Tim. And so we end up having Tim trying to wake Marty up to just say, like, fight it, like, wake up. And so we end up having Tim waking up Marty, kind of pulling off the strings of this clone, and so we end up having the clone, of course, just dying off because I guess she didn't get like 100% of the download of the original Marty, and so she just died off, which I thought was interesting. I'm like, dude, like she was almost fully functioning. Yeah, she was walking around with no clothes on yet again, and so plus she was like having a dialogue with this with Tim, basically like she could have easily just outed this guy and then all would have been for nothing or whatever. But we end up having, of course, Marty and Tim like sleeking away without anybody even noticing, And so we have it to where both Marty and Tim are walking on, and they seem to like be acting like all the other pod people. And so we have Marty who ends up bumping into Jen, who, of course, like we end up also finding out that like Jen, like her father is a military like guy that owns this base and like head honcho. We end up finding General Platt, who ends up going and is shipping all these military vehicles out to all kinds of states, so eventually everyone else could be a pod person. And so we have Marty who reconnects with Jen Platt, and we have it to where Jen is like, well, yeah, this is a real freak show, huh? Like, kind of seemingly making it seem like if she's playing along with this facade of like, oh, like I'm gonna be a real like I'm gonna be a fake person so I can kind of blend in here. But it seems like Jen doesn't sound like all the other pod people. And so we have it to where Jen goes and is mentioning how this place is a freak show and that uh, Jen knows exactly where they're keeping uh, Marty's brother. And so seemingly Tim and Marty bring up this like stonewall front of just like, meh, like like we're just gonna keep acting like aliens because we think that she might be an alien. But then eventually Marty ends up breaking and then turning around and saying like, well, where is he? And we immediately have it toward Jen, who was to be thought that maybe she wasn't an alien, then does the finger and the ah. And so we end up having every single either military person or whatever who could not get to either one of these people. We end up having them like their way uh, to get to these people. And so we end up finding that Andy has run, I guess, from two soldier-esh like forces, and so he had ran off to go and find Marty and Tim, and Andy's like, well, hey, I'm here, like like, hey, come and pick me up so I can like I can all like we can all get into this helicopter and run off. And so we have Marty, Annie, and Tim all going into this helicopter, but then eventually we find out that Andy is one of them. And so he ends up trying to attack Marty. He ends up trying to attack Tim and try to get him to crash the helicopter. And so we end up having Marty grabbing Andy, and Andy is trying to choke Marty. And so Tim is like, dude, throw him out of the helicopter. Throw him out. Like, I don't care how high we are. It's like, he's no longer your brother. He's one of them. And so we have Marty who ends up tossing her brother out of the helicopter. And you just have this, like, scene of this kid just going, ah, like, dude, you're gonna die. Like, you should be caring what you're doing, but you're just this alien that's just programmed to just do this thing and whatever, what have you. So we have it to where Marty and Tim are to eventually go after the vehicles that are to all have these pod things in them, and Marty ends up kind of gunning them down with this helicopter. And so with the tail end of this movie, we are kind of led to believe that it could be possible that we do not know how far that the invaders have reached. And so we have it to where Marty has this kind of suspiciousness towards the tail end of here, where She's like, well, yeah, like we've gunned them all down because they've taken everything from me. And so we end up having the helicopter landing on some base somewhere to have them kind of question, well, are these pod people? Are they not pod people? We'll have to figure it out when we land. Yikes. So, with that said, that is the end of this movie, and at the end of the day, that's the end of this review. So, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, everybody.